Get out of the car. Now. Jordan Hayes' voice cut through the quiet night air like a blade. The dimly lit parking lot, empty except for a few scattered vehicles, became an unspoken battleground. Standing across from him was Detective Riley Carter, her posture composed but unwavering. She was dressed casually, her badge tucked out of sight, standing beside an unmarked sedan. Despite her relaxed appearance, authority radiated from her. "I'm allowed to be here," she stated, her voice even. But Hayes wasn't interested in explanations. His hand hovered over his belt, fingers inching toward his holster, a silent warning. "Don't push me," he growled. "Step away from the car, or I'll move you myself." Tension thickened the air, wrapping around Riley like a noose. She raised a hand, a measured attempt to ease the hostility. "You need to think this through," she said, her tone careful but firm. "Let's handle this the right way." Before she could finish, Hayes lunged. A sharp shove sent her stumbling back against the car. "People like you don't belong here," he spat. Riley's breath hitched. Those words stung deeper than the impact of his shove. Straightening herself, she brushed the dust from her jacket and locked eyes with him. "What did you just say?" Her voice was low, controlled. "You heard me." His smirk was laced with superiority. "Now leave before I call in reinforcements." His arrogance was suffocating, his posture dripping with entitlement. But then Riley did something that made his confidence crack. Slowly, she reached into her pocket. Hayes stiffened, his hand twitching toward his weapon. But she wasn't drawing a gun. She pulled out something far worse for him. Her badge. The parking lot's dim lighting gleamed off the insignia. Chief of Detectives. The color drained from Hayes' face. His bravado faltered as the realization hit. He had just assaulted his superior. Riley took a deliberate step forward, her voice like steel. "Let me make something clear," she said. "I don't answer to you. You answer to me." A thick silence followed. Hayes' jaw clenched, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. He was drowning in his own arrogance, choking on the weight of his mistake. What happened next set off a chain of events no one could have anticipated. The next morning, the precinct was quieter than usual. Conversations were hushed, glances stolen. An undercurrent of unease hummed beneath the surface. In her office, Riley sat behind her desk, fingers pressing against her temples. The report from Internal Affairs lay in front of her, every damning detail of last night's encounter spelled out in ink. Sleep had been elusive. Hayes' reckless actions played on a loop in her mind. The door creaked open, and Deputy Chief Marcus Reed stepped inside, shutting it behind him. His expression was tight with concern. "Chief," he said, voice low, "we got a problem. Hayes knows what's coming. He's already stirring the pot, talking to his people, trying to rally support." Riley leaned back, her gaze sharp. She had expected fallout. What she didn't expect was just how far some were willing to go to protect one of their own, no matter how guilty he was. Support for what? He broke every rule in the book. There's no justifying what he did. Riley's voice was sharp, cutting through the tense silence in her office. Marcus shifted uneasily. "It's not about justifying it. It's about loyalty. Some of the old-timers, they don't see you as one of them. They're spinning this like you're being too harsh, too political." Riley let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Too harsh?" He physically assaulted his superior officer without provocation. If I were a man, they'd be demanding his resignation. "This isn't about loyalty, Marcus. It's about resisting change." Marcus nodded, silent but knowing. She was right, but that didn't make the situation any less complicated. "The review board convenes in 3 days," he reminded her. "Wanted to take point on this?" No, Riley's response was immediate, resolute. "This is mine." Hayes needs to understand that actions have consequences. Not just for him, but for everyone who thinks they can operate outside the rules. Inside the locker room, Jordan Hayes paced like a caged animal. A handful of officers hovered nearby, their expressions a mix of discomfort and quiet solidarity. Ben Foster, one of Hayes' closest allies, leaned against a bench, studying him. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," Ben said carefully. "You didn't know she was your superior." "That's not the point," Hayes shot back, his frustration spilling over. "She's going to make an example out of me." Do you know what this could do to my career? My pension? Ben shrugged. Maybe just apologize. Call it a misunderstanding. That usually works. Hayes stopped pacing, turning on him with burning eyes. You think this is about an apology? She wants to humiliate me. I won't let her win. In her office, Riley Carter watched the footage again. The security camera had captured it all. Hayes' aggressive stance, his refusal to listen, the shove. But what stood out the most wasn't the physicality. It was the expression in his eyes. Not caution, not regret, disdain. A sharp knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Marcus stepped inside, his expression more serious than before. "Chief, there's something you need to know," he said. "Hayes is planning to file a grievance." Riley arched an eyebrow. "For what?" "Retaliation." Marcus hesitated. "He's claiming discrimination." Riley exhaled slowly, crossing her arms. "That's his angle?" Marcus nodded. "It's desperate, but with some of the guys who already don't like how you run things, it might stick." She leaned back, her gaze steady. Let him dig his own hole. The evidence is on my side, and the footage speaks for itself. If he wants to turn this into a public spectacle, I'll be ready." But the spectacle had already begun. By the next morning, murmurs of the incident had spread beyond the department. The union was asking questions, and factions within the force were quietly taking sides. The review board convened in a room thick with tension. At one end of the long table, Riley sat with unwavering composure. Across from her, Hayes sat stiffly, his union representative at his side. The hearing was grueling, his defense laced with deflection, half-truths, and attempts to shift the blame. But Riley held her ground, laying out the facts with precision. The footage, the reports, testimonies from other officers who had witnessed his actions firsthand. "This isn't about me or him," she said firmly. "This is about what kind of department we want to be. Do we uphold the values we claim to stand for? Or do we protect those who violate them?" A thick silence followed. The weight of her words settled over the room. The fallout was swift. As more evidence surfaced, Hayes' supporters grew quieter. His influence waned. And though Riley knew the fight wasn't over, she also knew something had shifted. Change had begun. That night, standing in her office, gazing out over the city, she allowed herself a rare moment of hope. The truth was out, and while the battle was far from over, the way forward was finally in sight. As Riley stood in her office, the city lights flickering beyond her window, she knew this wasn't the end. The battle for integrity, for real change, had only begun. Hayes might fall, but others like him would resist, clinging to a system that protected the powerful and silenced the just. But Riley wasn't backing down. She had faced worse, and she would face more. Because leadership wasn't about comfort, it was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. And as the precinct braced for the fallout, she remained steady, knowing one truth: the future belonged to those who fought for it.